The champagne sparkled under the chandeliers, laughter rolled across the ballroom, and Elena Carter's world ended in a single breath. 7 months pregnant, she stood frozen in the shadows of the lavish Metropolitan Hotel ballroom, her trembling hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Across the crowded floor, her husband, her Matthew, was laughing, twirling a glass of whiskey and smiling at the woman hanging from his arm. That woman was not her. It was Vanessa Miller. Elena blinked hard, as if her mind had created an illusion, as if stress had conjured the worst possible nightmare. But no, it was real. Vanessa, her closest friend since college, the woman who had stood beside her on her wedding day, was now draped against Matthew's chest. Her crimson gown clinging to her curves, her lips painted the same deep red that now pressed against Matthew's ear. Elena's throat tightened. For months she had felt the distance. Matthew's late nights, the sudden business trips, the cologne that lingered on him long after midnight. She had tried to explain it away. He was working harder to provide for the baby. He was under pressure at the firm. He was simply tired. But tonight the truth blazed under the chandeliers, undeniable and cruel. Her knees weakened. She reached for the nearest chair, her breath quickening. Her child kicked inside her, as if sensing her turmoil. She whispered, "It's okay, baby. I'm still here." The betrayal wasn't just Matthew's. It was Vanessa's, too. The two people she trusted most had conspired in silence, shredding her heart before her eyes. She wanted to scream, to run onto the ballroom floor and demand answers. But the crowd of tuxedos and glittering gowns blurred together, their eyes already curious, already whispering. She couldn't give them the spectacle they craved. Matthew raised his glass, his grin wide, his hand slipping lower around Vanessa's waist. "To new beginnings," he declared to the group around him. Laughter erupted. The words sliced Elena open. New beginnings? While she stood alone, carrying his child, he toasted a future without her. Her chest burned, the baby shifted, her back ached, and a wave of nausea rushed over her. She pushed through the crowd, clutching her clutch bag like a lifeline. Every step felt like she was moving through molasses, faces blurring as whispers chased her down the corridor. Elena Carter. Isn't that his wife? She looks pale. Is she pregnant? My God, he's flaunting Vanessa right in front of her. She reached the marble restroom, gripping the sink. The fluorescent lights revealed a face she barely recognized. Flushed cheeks, tear-streaked eyes, hair tumbling from the bun she'd pinned so carefully just hours earlier. "How could you?" she whispered to the mirror. "How could you do this to us, to our baby?" Memories surged. Matthew proposing on a beach at sunset. Promises of forever. Vanessa laughing with her in their college dorm, swearing they'd always be sisters. Lies, all of it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Matthew. Her heart pounded as she opened it, desperate for some explanation. "Don't cause a scene, Elena. You knew this was coming. Vanessa understands me. You don't. Go home. We'll talk later." The words blurred as fresh tears welled. Go home, as if she were an inconvenience, as if the last 7 years of love, the home they built, and the child growing inside her meant nothing. Her stomach clenched sharply. A stabbing pain shot through her lower back. She gasped, one hand gripping the sink, the other wrapping protectively over her belly. "Not now. Please. Not now." The door creaked open. Vanessa stepped in, heels clicking, her perfume filling the space. She looked Elena up and down with a smirk. "Elena," she purred, "you shouldn't be here. Stress isn't good for the baby." Elena's voice cracked. You were my friend." Vanessa tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "Friendship is overrated. Matthew needs a woman who can stand beside him, not hold him back. You were never enough for him." Elena's hand trembled. "He's my husband." Vanessa's smile widened. "Not for long. He's already planning the divorce. By the time your baby arrives, you'll be yesterday's news." The pain in Elena's belly intensified. Her vision swam. "Please, stop." But Vanessa only laughed softly. "You should save your strength. You'll need it. Single mothers have such difficult lives." The words hit Elena harder than any slap. Her knees buckled, and she nearly collapsed before gripping the sink again. A sharp contraction ripped through her body, leaving her gasping for air. Vanessa's smirk faltered. "Are you going into labor?" Elena shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "It's too early. I'm only 7 months." Her body betrayed her with another contraction, sharper, longer. Fear clamped down on her chest. The baby. What if something happened to the baby? Vanessa backed away, her perfect poise cracking, her voice shaky. I'll get someone. She fled, her heels clicking down the hallway. Elena slid to the floor, her breath shallow, her dress pooling around her trembling body. She pressed both hands against her stomach, whispering through sobs. Stay with me, little one. Please, stay. The restroom door burst open. Hotel staff rushed in, voices overlapping. Call an ambulance. She's in labor. Elena's vision dimmed. The world spun. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the ceiling's golden light fracturing into shards like her life. And in that darkness, a single thought echoed in her mind. Would her baby survive this night, and who would be there when the child entered the world? The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender from the flowers a kind nurse had left on the windowsill. Machines beeped steadily, their rhythm a cruel reminder that life was fragile, borrowed, and easily lost. Elena Carter stirred, her eyes fluttering open, her body heavy as if she had been dragged through the depths of an ocean. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the pain in her belly, the cold weight of fear, and the memory of Vanessa's smirk crashed back into her like a tidal wave. Her hands flew to her stomach. The baby. A nurse appeared instantly, pressing a gentle hand to her shoulder. Easy, Mrs. Carter. The baby's alive. He's premature, but he's fighting. Tears burst from her eyes, a flood of relief and terror. Alive. But how long would he stay that way? She whispered a prayer, gripping the nurse's hand like a lifeline. Alone in the sterile hospital bed, Elena's mind wandered backward, retracing the path that had led her to this moment of unbearable fragility. She hadn't always been this broken woman, clutching hope like a drowning victim clings to driftwood. She had once been radiant. Elena grew up in a modest neighborhood in Chicago, the daughter of a high school art teacher and a mechanic who worked double shifts to keep food on the table. Their house was small, with peeling paint and a leaky roof, but it pulsed with laughter, music, and love. Her mother filled the walls with paintings. Her father read bedtime stories by the flickering glow of a failing lamp. They didn't have much, but Elena never felt poor. She excelled in school, driven by her parents' sacrifices. She painted murals on the walls of the community center, tutored neighborhood kids, and dreamed of becoming an art teacher like her mother. She believed in love, in family, in building a life rooted in kindness. That was the Elena who first met Matthew Carter. He had swept into her life like a whirlwind, tall, confident, with a smile that promised the world. She was 22, waitressing at a charity banquet to earn extra money for grad school. He was 30, already climbing the ranks at an investment firm, already wearing suits that cost more than her father's car. Matthew noticed her carrying a heavy tray and swooped in to help, his charm effortless. A woman this beautiful shouldn't be working this hard. Elena had blushed, unused to such attention. His confidence felt intoxicating, his ambition magnetic. Within weeks, he was taking her to rooftop dinners, showering her with gifts she didn't think she deserved. He spoke of empires, of wealth, of a future dripping with success. He made her feel chosen, elevated above the ordinary. Her parents had been cautious. Love is not built on money, her mother warned gently. But Elena, young and starry-eyed, believed Matthew when he said she was his everything. They married within a year. The wedding was lavish, funded by Matthew's wealthy colleagues, but Elena didn't care about the champagne towers or the orchestra. She cared about the man who whispered promises at the altar, vows of forever, vows of children, of building a home together. For a while, life was bliss. Their downtown apartment gleamed, Matthew's career soared, and Elena abandoned her own dreams of teaching to support his. She became the perfect wife, boosting parties, smiling for investors, wearing gowns he picked out to make them look like the perfect couple. She told herself it was love. She told herself this was partnership, but small cracks appeared. Matthew's temper when she questioned his late nights, the way he dismissed her paintings as hobbies, the subtle digs about her background, how she should be grateful he had given her a better life. Elena endured it all because she believed in marriage, because she believed in him. And when she discovered she was pregnant, she thought it might be the miracle that healed their rift. She remembered the morning she told him. She had baked his favorite cinnamon rolls, left the positive pregnancy test in a little gift box on the breakfast table. She had been trembling with excitement, her heart full of hope. Matthew's eyes had widened, and for a fleeting second, she thought he was happy. But then he said, "A baby? Now? Elena, do you know what this will do to my focus at work, to my reputation?" Her joy wilted under his words, but she still tried to believe. She stroked his hand and whispered, "This baby will bring us closer. I know it." She was wrong. Matthew grew colder with every passing week of her pregnancy. His nights away stretched longer, his excuses thinner. He stopped touching her growing belly, stopped asking how she felt. And then came Vanessa. Vanessa had been her confidant since college, the one who held her hair back after too many drinks, the one who knew her secrets. Elena had trusted her like a sister. She never noticed the stolen glances between Vanessa and Matthew, never questioned why Vanessa suddenly spent so much time at their apartment, helping Elena prepare for the baby. Until the gala. Until the moment the world crumbled and truth bared its fangs. Now Elena lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart a hollow cavity. She was 29 years old, abandoned, humiliated, left to give birth alone. But as the night dragged on, a flicker of determination sparked within her. Her child was alive. Fragile, premature, but alive. She thought of her mother's words. "Strength isn't loud, Elena. Sometimes it's just surviving when everything tells you to give up." She would not give up. Not now, not ever. Her tears dried. Her hands steadied. She looked through the glass at the tiny incubator in the NICU, where her baby lay swaddled in tubes and wires, his chest rising and falling with fragile determination. "Fight, little one," she whispered. "If you fight, I'll fight too." In that moment, Elena Carter stopped being the broken wife. She became a mother, and a mother's love could ignite revolutions. What she didn't know, what destiny was already setting in motion, was that this fragile child, rejected by his millionaire father, would soon be claimed by a man far greater. A man who had lost everything, but who would see in Elena and her son the chance for a new beginning. The door to her room creaked open. Heavy footsteps approached. A shadow loomed across the floor, tall and commanding. Elena turned her head, her heart leaping into her throat. And for the first time, she saw Alexander Grant. The world outside the hospital never stopped. Skyscrapers still reached for the heavens, the stock market still pulsed with greed, and lavish parties still sparkled with diamonds and champagne. For the wealthy elite of Chicago, life was a game of power, reputation, and appearances. For Elena Carter, it was survival. Her days bled together inside the white walls of the hospital. The hum of machines was her constant companion, the glass of the neonatal intensive care unit, her invisible prison. She sat for hours watching her tiny son in the incubator, his chest rising and falling with a fragile rhythm, wires and tubes crisscrossing his little body. "Just breathe, sweetheart," she whispered daily. "Breathe for mommy." Outside, the city thrived in opulence. Gala invitations continued to flood Matthew's inbox. He and Vanessa were photographed at charity events, arm in arm, the perfect pair. They smiled for the cameras while Elena sat in a stiff chair, her hand pressed against the incubator, begging her son to hold on. That was the cruel truth of her world. While others sipped champagne under chandeliers, she clutched styrofoam coffee cups in waiting rooms. The hospital had become her universe. The cafeteria with its bitter coffee, the long, sterile halls that echoed her footsteps, the faint lullabies playing from the maternity wing. She memorized the nurses' faces, their kind eyes that tried not to show pity. "Elena," one nurse said softly one night, resting a hand on her shoulder, "you're stronger than you think. Most mothers don't stay here around the clock. But you never leave him." Elena smiled faintly. "He doesn't know this world yet. I want the first thing he knows to be love, even if it's through glass." Her strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, relentless, the kind that kept her upright when exhaustion threatened to drag her under. But the contrast outside those hospital walls was glaring. Every time Elena picked up a magazine in the waiting room, there they were, Matthew and Vanessa, plastered across glossy pages. Chicago's new power couple. The millionaire and his dazzling fiancée. Photographers captured them stepping out of black limousines, diamonds flashing, laughter frozen in time. The headlines praised Matthew's bold career moves, the same man who had abandoned his wife in her third trimester. They praised Vanessa's effortless glamour. The same woman who had whispered venom in a restroom while Elena's body went into labor. Elena wanted to rip the pages apart, but instead she folded them neatly and placed them aside. She couldn't afford to waste energy on anger. Her son needed her. Still, in the quiet hours of the night, her thoughts drifted. What had her life become? Just months ago, she had lived in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, marble countertops, and a closet filled with gowns. She had thought she was safe, cherished, part of a world she belonged to. Now she lived on vending machine snacks and worry, her only luxury the chair beside her son's incubator. But as the weeks passed, Elena began to see something she had missed before. Money and status meant nothing without loyalty. The penthouse, the designer dresses, the glittering galas, none of it had been real. It had all been built on Matthew's ambition and Vanessa's greed. The real world, Elena realized, was here, in the quiet fight of a newborn taking his first breaths, in the strength of a mother's hand pressed against cold glass, in the way strangers, nurses, doctors, volunteers showed more compassion than the man she had once loved. It was in that fragile balance between despair and hope that Alexander Grant entered her life. The billionaire rarely appeared in public anymore. 3 years ago, his wife Clara had been killed in a car accident, and since then he had retreated from the social scene. Rumors swirled. Some said he had thrown himself entirely into his tech empire. Others whispered he had become a recluse haunted by grief. The truth was simpler and darker. He had loved Clara with everything he had, and when she died, the light went out of his world. Yet Alexander still came to the hospital. It was the same hospital where Clara had volunteered, comforting sick children and exhausted parents. Sometimes he funded new equipment. Sometimes he sat quietly in the chapel, head bowed. That night, fate brought him to the NICU corridor. Elena was slumped in a chair, her hair unkempt, her eyes ringed with sleepless nights. She didn't notice the tall figure pause at the glass, his gaze settling on the tiny baby fighting for life. Alexander stood silently for a long moment, something stirring in his chest. The sight of the fragile infant, so small yet so determined, pulled at wounds he thought had scarred over. Then he saw Elena. The curve of her shoulders, the fierce way she pressed her hand against the glass, whispering encouragement through her exhaustion. It struck him. This wasn't weakness. This was strength in its purest form. He approached quietly, his deep voice breaking the silence. "Your son?" Elena startled, looking up at the stranger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked lightly at the temples. His suit was impeccably tailored, but his eyes carried a sorrow she recognized instantly. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's mine. He came too early, but he's fighting." Alexander nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the incubator. "He's a warrior. Sometimes the smallest ones fight the hardest." Something in his tone made Elena's chest tighten. He spoke not as a billionaire, not as a man of power, but as someone who understood loss. For the first time in weeks, Elena didn't feel invisible. The hospital corridor suddenly felt less cold, less endless. A stranger had noticed her pain, and in his eyes she saw something unexpected, not pity, but respect. That night was the beginning of a shift. The city outside still glittered with false perfection. But within these walls, Elena began to realize that perhaps there was a different kind of world waiting. One not built on betrayal, but on resilience. And as Alexander Grant stood beside her, watching her son breathe, Elena felt the first spark of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The rain poured in sheets against the wide glass windows of the penthouse, streaking the view of Chicago's glittering skyline. Inside, laughter echoed, crystal glasses clinked, and Matthew Carter leaned back on a leather sofa, a smug smile plastered across his face. He was exactly where he believed he belonged, at the center of attention. Vanessa Miller lounged beside him, draped in a silk robe the color of blood. She leaned into his chest, her manicured fingers tracing idle patterns across his shirt, as if she were already marking her territory. "Do you realize," she purred, "that in less than a year you've shed the weight of a needy wife and gained me instead?" Matthew chuckled, swirling his whiskey. "A trade-up, I'd say." Elena never understood ambition. She wanted love, art, small dreams. "You," he kissed Vanessa's hair. "You understand winning." Vanessa's lips curved in satisfaction. "And what about the baby?" A shadow flickered across Matthew's face, quickly masked with arrogance. The baby's her problem, not mine. I told her from the beginning, I can't be tied down. My career comes first. If she wants to play mommy, she can do it alone. Vanessa laughed softly, cruelly. She will. And when society sees her as a struggling single mother, we'll be untouchable. You'll rise even faster, no more baggage dragging you down. The two of them toasted, their glasses chiming in the dim light. But beneath the surface, Matthew's arrogance masked insecurity. His wealth wasn't entirely his own. It was leveraged, borrowed, fragile. He needed connections, investors, and constant appearances to stay afloat. And Vanessa, with her cunning charm and social climbing instincts, was the perfect partner in his scheme. They appeared on red carpets, dripping in luxury. He bragged about bold investments. She dazzled in couture gowns. To the world, they were a golden couple. Behind closed doors, they plotted like wolves. Once your divorce is finalized, Vanessa whispered one night as she sprawled across the penthouse bed, we'll host the biggest engagement party the city has ever seen. Everyone who matters will be there. You'll look unstoppable. Matthew smirked. And Elena? She'll be nothing but a memory. A poor, pitiful woman clinging to a baby she can't afford. What Matthew didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the very baby he dismissed would soon hold more power than his entire empire. But for now, his cruelty reigned. At work, Matthew bragged openly about his fresh start, dropping hints to colleagues that his ex-wife couldn't keep up with his pace, that she was too fragile, too simple. Vanessa whispered the same to socialites over champagne, each word carefully calculated to tarnish Elena's reputation. She never fit in, Vanessa confided one evening to a group of women at a gala. Sweet, but terribly naive, Matthew needed a partner who matched his world, not someone who cried over bills and bedtime stories. The women nodded, their jeweled earrings catching the light, already reshaping the narrative in their minds. Elena Carter, the poor little wife who couldn't handle the demands of success. Matthew and Vanessa built their empire on lies, but lies told often enough began to sound like truth. Back at the hospital, Elena knew nothing of the venom being dripped into society's ear. Her only focus was her son's fragile heartbeat. She didn't see the glossy magazines declaring Matthew and Vanessa Chicago's next power couple. She didn't hear the snide remarks about her supposed weakness, but Alexander Grant heard. From his quiet corner of the world, the billionaire watched the spectacle unfold. He read the articles, the headlines, the smug interviews Matthew gave about moving forward. And though Alexander rarely cared about gossip, something about the cruelty embedded in Matthew's words struck him. Here was a man who abandoned his wife in her most vulnerable moment, yet strutted like a king. And here was Elena. Fragile, yes, but filled with a resilience Matthew could never comprehend. The contrast burned in Alexander's mind. Meanwhile, Vanessa's hunger grew. Power wasn't enough, she wanted permanence. One evening, as Matthew buttoned his cufflinks before another gala, she leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "When will you make it official?" she asked, her tone sharp. Matthew frowned at the mirror. "Official?" "The divorce," Vanessa pressed. "The engagement. Marriage. I won't stay your mistress forever." Matthew turned, his smile patronizing. "Patience, Vanessa. Timing is everything. The investors need stability. We'll play the happy couple when it benefits me most." Vanessa's eyes darkened. For all her cunning, she despised waiting. She hadn't clawed her way into his life to remain second place. Still, she plastered on a smile. "Then don't take too long. I'm not a woman who waits quietly." It was a warning, thinly veiled. Matthew, blinded by arrogance, dismissed it. While the city clinked glasses and cameras flashed, Elena's child grew stronger in the incubator, inch by inch, day by day. Each breath he took was a victory, and with every small triumph, Elena's strength hardened. But in Matthew's world, time was running out. His debts deepened, investors whispered. Behind his glittering smile was desperation he refused to admit. And Vanessa, oh, Vanessa, she watched closely. She loved Matthew's ambition, but she loved power more. If Matthew faltered, she would not hesitate to leap to the next rung of the ladder. The villains thought they were winning. They thought Elena was broken, invisible, irrelevant. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because while Matthew and Vanessa schemed under chandeliers, a new alliance was quietly forming in the sterile glow of the hospital. Alexander Grant, with his wealth, his grief, and his unshakable sense of justice, had seen enough. The millionaire who discarded his pregnant wife for her best friend had no idea that his empire was about to crumble. Not at the hands of investors, not at the whispers of society, but by the woman he abandoned and the child he rejected. And when the reckoning came, it would be public, merciless, and unforgettable. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, chandeliers scattering brilliance across sequined gowns and tuxedos. Waiters glided between the guests, their trays heavy with champagne flutes. Cameras flashed at every corner, capturing the glittering faces of Chicago's elite. At the center of it all stood Matthew Carter, a self-satisfied grin on his face, his arms securely wrapped around Vanessa Miller. The two of them looked like a portrait ripped straight from a glossy magazine. He, the ambitious millionaire, and she, the radiant socialite in a gown the color of midnight. "Smile, darling," Vanessa whispered, pressing her lips to his cheek just as the cameras clicked. Matthew complied, tightening his arm around her, knowing the photo would hit the morning papers. To the world, they were perfection. But to Alina Carter, standing quietly at the edge of the room, the sight was a dagger straight to the heart. She hadn't wanted to come. Every fiber of her being screamed to stay away, to hide in the quiet safety of the hospital beside her fragile son. But the invitation had arrived anonymously, delivered with a handwritten note. "You need to see this with your own eyes." At first she had crumpled it in fury. But something inside her, some flicker of strength that had grown since her son's birth, urged her to attend. So she came, wearing a simple black dress borrowed from a nurse who had insisted, "You can't face them looking broken." Now, as she stood in the shadows of the ballroom, she realized the note had been right. She needed to see the truth, not just the betrayal and private whispers, but the public performance of it. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and the room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the annual Westbridge Foundation Gala. Tonight, we honor those who redefine success in Chicago. Please welcome our distinguished honoree, Mr. Matthew Carter." The crowd erupted in applause. Elena's heart plummeted. Honoree? Matthew? He strode confidently to the stage, Vanessa gliding beside him like a queen at his coronation. Together, they looked unstoppable. "Thank you," Matthew began, his voice smooth, trained. "Tonight is about more than wealth. It's about resilience, determination, and never letting anything or anyone hold you back." The audience cheered, oblivious to the cruelty embedded in his words. Elena felt the sting as if he had slapped her. Anyone, anything. He meant her. He meant their child. She clutched her clutch so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream, to shout that he was a liar, a coward, a man who had abandoned his pregnant wife. But her voice stuck in her throat, choked by humiliation. Matthew continued, raising his glass. "I am grateful for the people who truly understand me, who walk beside me in this journey. And tonight, I stand with the woman who represents my future, Vanessa Miller." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by thunderous applause. The photographers swarmed, flashes exploding like fireworks. Vanessa beamed, slipping her hand into Matthew's. It wasn't just a gala anymore. It was a declaration, a public execution of Elena's marriage. "Alina Carter," someone whispered nearby. "Isn't she his wife? I thought she just had his baby." "No, look at them. Vanessa is clearly his partner now." "Poor thing, she must be so embarrassed." Elena's cheeks burned, her vision blurred. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was a spectacle, a feast for gossip. Her knees trembled. She turned, desperate to leave, when a familiar voice stopped her. "Elena." She froze. Slowly she turned to see Alexander Grant standing a few feet away, his tall frame commanding the room even from the shadows. His sharp eyes softened when they met hers. "You shouldn't face this alone," he said quietly. Elena shook her head, her voice breaking. "They're destroying me, Alexander, in front of everyone. He just erased me like I was nothing." Alexander's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting to the stage where Matthew basked in applause. Men like him build empires on lies, but lies crumble, Elena, and when they do, the fall is brutal. Tears stung her eyes. "I don't know how much more I can take." Alexander's voice lowered, steady and grounding. "You don't need to fight tonight, not yet. But remember this moment. Remember how it feels, because one day you'll stand taller than him, and he'll choke on the words he's speaking now." Elena swallowed hard, her chest heaving. For a fleeting second she saw it. The possibility that humiliation wasn't the end, but the beginning of something else. On stage, Matthew kissed Vanessa's hand for the cameras, cementing their union before the world. The crowd cheered louder, blind to the cruelty beneath the glamour. But Alexander didn't cheer. He stood at Elena's side, his presence a shield. And though Elena's heart ached, though shame pressed heavy on her shoulders, she clung to the quiet strength in his words. This wasn't the end of her story. As the night drew on, Matthew's arrogance grew. He toasted, he bragged, he paraded Vanessa like a trophy. And though Elena slipped out before the gala ended, the whispers followed her out into the night, each one a reminder of her shattered world. Yet as she stepped into the cool air, Alexander was there, holding the door open, his steady gaze fixed on her. "You survived tonight," he said, "and that means you can survive what comes next." Elena nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't feel entirely destroyed. Broken, yes, but not finished. Because in the ashes of public humiliation, something else had been born: resolve. And one day soon, Matthew and Vanessa would regret every flashbulb, every cheer, every smug smile they flaunted on that stage. The rain didn't stop that night. It fell in relentless sheets, soaking Elena as she stumbled out of the gala and into the empty streets. The echo of applause and laughter still rang in her ears, each cheer a cruel reminder of her public humiliation. Her heels clicked against the pavement until one snapped, sending her sprawling onto the wet concrete. She stayed there, knees scraped, dress clinging to her body, sobbing into the storm. For a moment, she wished the rain would just wash her away, erase her from a world that had turned so merciless. By the time she returned to the hospital, her son was sleeping peacefully in the incubator, his tiny chest rising and falling. Elena pressed her palm against the glass, whispering through tears, "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy's not strong enough. I don't know if I can do this." The next days blurred into one endless fog. Elena barely ate, she barely slept. She sat beside her son, silent, her once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion. Nurses exchanged worried glances, whispering about postpartum depression, about the toll of abandonment. One night, the weight became unbearable. Elena sat in the hospital chapel, the small wooden cross above the altar casting a faint shadow. She folded her hands, though prayer felt hollow. "God," she whispered, her voice cracking, "why? Why give me this child only to take everything else away? Why let the man I trusted destroy me so completely? Am I being punished?" Her sobs filled the empty room. She wanted to scream, to rage, but all that came was silence. And then came the thought that terrified her. Maybe Matthew was right. Maybe she wasn't enough. Maybe she couldn't raise this child alone. Maybe her son deserved more than a broken mother with nothing left to give. She pressed her forehead to the pew, trembling. For the first time, she felt the cold pull of surrender. When she returned to the NICU, Alexander was there. He stood quietly by the incubator, his hands folded behind his back, his gaze locked on the fragile infant. The sight of him startled her. Why was he here again? But his presence, calm and steady, filled the sterile room with something unfamiliar: safety. "Elena," he said gently, turning toward her, "you look exhausted." She managed a bitter laugh. "Exhausted doesn't cover it. I'm empty." Alexander studied her for a moment. "You're allowed to feel that way. You've been through more than most could bear." Elena shook her head, tears spilling again. "I can't do this. I thought I could, but I can't. Matthew was right. I'm weak. I can't even keep myself together, let alone raise a child." Her words cracked something in her chest. She clutched the chair, her body shaking with sobs. But Alexander didn't flinch. He crouched beside her, his voice steady. "Do you think weakness is sitting here, night after night, when you could have walked away? Do you think weakness is fighting for a child who can't fight for himself? Elena, you're the strongest person I've met." She shook her head violently. "No. Strong women don't end up abandoned. Strong women don't beg for scraps of love." Alexander's eyes softened, his own pain flickering beneath the surface. "Strong women survive, even when the world strips everything away. My wife, Clara, she was the strongest person I knew. She didn't survive the accident, but the way she lived, the way she gave love until her last breath, that was strength. I see that same fire in you, Elena. You just don't recognize it yet." His words hit her like a lifeline tossed into a storm. But she still felt herself sinking. What if I fail him? She whispered, her eyes darting to her son's tiny frame. What if he grows up hating me for not giving him the life Matthew could? Alexander's jaw tightened. Matthew can give him money, parties, a false smile. But you, he pointed to her heart, you can give him love, and that is worth more than every fortune in this city. Elena's lips trembled. For the first time, she let herself believe him, if only for a moment. But despair wasn't easily silenced. That night, alone in her hospital room, she stared at the ceiling, her body frozen. The darkness whispered again, "You're not enough. Let someone else raise him. Walk away before you ruin him." She rose, trembling, and walked down the hall to the NICU. The baby stirred in the incubator, his tiny hand twitching. Elena pressed her palm against the glass, tears streaking her face. "I love you," she whispered. "But maybe love isn't enough." Her chest ached as she whispered the words she never thought she would. "Maybe I should give you to someone stronger." The thought sliced her open, but it lingered, refusing to leave. As she stood there, broken, Alexander stepped into the room once more. He had returned quietly, as if drawn by some invisible pull. He saw the torment on her face, the way she hovered over her child with the weight of surrender pressing down on her. "Elena," he said softly. She flinched, wiping at her tears. "I can't do this. He deserves more than me." Alexander's expression shifted. Pain, empathy, and something else. Resolve. He stepped closer, his voice firm. "Then let me help. If you believe you can't carry this burden alone, don't. Share it. Let me stand beside you. Let me fight with you. You don't have to walk away, Elena. You don't have to surrender." Her eyes widened, searching his face. Why would a man like him, wealthy, powerful, haunted by his own grief, care about her and her child? But in his gaze, she saw no pity, no charity, only truth. And though despair still clung to her, for the first time she felt a sliver of something stronger than surrender. Hope. The hospital's fluorescent lights flickered faintly as dawn broke, casting long shadows across the sterile corridors. Elena sat in her usual chair beside the NICU glass, her head resting against the wall, exhaustion pulling her eyelids shut. Her baby, tiny, fragile, but still breathing, slept in his incubator. Each rise and fall of his chest was a miracle. She whispered, "Hold on, sweetheart. Mommy's still here." She didn't notice the tall figure watching from the doorway. Alexander Grant leaned against the frame, his hands folded, his gaze steady. He had come almost every day since that night in the chapel, always quietly, always without fanfare. "Elena," he said softly. She startled, wiping her tired eyes. "You shouldn't keep coming here. You don't owe me anything." His voice was low, deliberate. "I'm not here because I owe you. I'm here because I want to be." She blinked, stunned into silence. For weeks, Alexander had stood beside her in small ways, bringing coffee, arranging for extra nurses when the baby's condition worsened, sitting with her in silence during the longest nights. But now, there was something in his tone she hadn't heard before. A decision. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the incubator. "Elena, I've been watching you fight for this child with everything you have, and I've been thinking, he shouldn't just survive, he should thrive." Her throat tightened. "What are you saying?" Alexander drew a slow breath, his expression grave. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. We never had children. She wanted them more than anything, and when she died, that dream died with her." His voice cracked for the first time, raw with grief. "But when I look at your son, I see a chance. Not to replace Clara, never that. But to honor her, to give this boy the life she would have wanted for any child." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander? I don't understand." He turned fully toward her now, his gaze unflinching. "Let me claim him as mine. Legally, publicly. Your son will carry my name, my legacy. He will be my heir." The words struck her like thunder. She stared at him, heart racing. "That's impossible. He's not your child. Alexander's voice cut gently through her protest. "He doesn't need to be mine by blood. Blood doesn't make a father. Commitment does. And Matthew," his jaw hardened, "has already abandoned him. Signed away his rights in silence. That man is no father, but I can be." Elena gasped, clutching the arms of her chair. The thought was unthinkable, impossible, and yet the way Alexander spoke, steady and certain, made it feel real. You'd do that for us?" she whispered. "For him," Alexander said firmly, glancing at the tiny infant. "And for you, because no woman should face what you faced alone, and no child should begin life as unwanted." Her chest heaved with emotion. But what about the world? The gossip? They'll say he's not yours. They'll— Let them talk, Alexander interrupted, his voice steel. When I sign his birth certificate, when the papers announce him as my heir, no one will question it. Wealth silences doubt, power rewrites stories, and I have both. Elena's tears spilled freely now. She pressed a hand to her lips, overwhelmed. For weeks she had felt like she was drowning, abandoned by the man who should have been her anchor. And now, another man, one she barely knew, was offering not just a lifeline but an entire future. Why? She asked again, voice trembling. Why me? Why my son? Alexander's eyes softened. Because I see strength in you, Elena, the kind of strength that deserves to be lifted, not broken. And because when I look at him, I don't see Matthew's shadow. I see possibility. I see hope. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady beep of machines and the faint hum of the incubator. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. This was the twist of fate she never imagined. The millionaire who had destroyed her life replaced by a billionaire offering to rebuild it. She whispered, "If I say yes, everything changes." Alexander nodded once. "Everything will change. For you, for him, for me." Her hands shook as she reached for the incubator, pressing her palm against the glass. "He deserves more than I can give him alone." "And you deserve more than Matthew left you with," Alexander said firmly. Her eyes met his, filled with tears and something else, trust. Fragile, tentative, but real. Finally she nodded. Yes. The single word sealed their fate. Alexander exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing for the first time in years. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "The papers are ready. I didn't want to push you until you were ready. But now?" He set them on the chair beside her. "Now we can begin." Elena picked up the documents with trembling hands. They were official. Guardianship, recognition of paternity, legal protection. All with Alexander Grant's name emblazoned in bold. She pressed her hand to her mouth again, overwhelmed. "You already? How long have you been planning this?" Alexander's gaze was steady. "Since the first night I saw you whispering to him through the glass. I knew then that I wanted to fight for both of you." Elena let out a sob, half sorrow, half relief. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Alexander murmured. "Just keep loving him. Let me handle the rest." At that moment the baby stirred, a tiny whimper escaping his lips. Elena leaned close, whispering, "Hear that, sweetheart? You're not alone anymore. You have a father now." And for the first time in months, her words weren't tainted with fear. They were filled with hope. What Elena didn't know, what Matthew and Vanessa could never anticipate, was that this decision would soon send shockwaves through their perfect little empire. The man they had dismissed as irrelevant, the woman they had humiliated, was about to return not as a forgotten wife, but as the mother of a billionaire's heir. And when that truth surfaced, it would not just humiliate them, it would destroy them. The first time Elena Carter signed her name beside Alexander Grant's on the guardianship papers, her hands were still trembling. She had entered the hospital as a discarded wife, a humiliated woman, a mother terrified she would fail her child. But with a stroke of ink, the story shifted. Her son was no longer the abandoned offspring of a selfish millionaire. He was now the heir to one of the largest tech empires in the world. And Elena, she was no longer invisible. But transformation doesn't happen in a single signature. It happens in steps, small, painful, relentless. The first step was survival. For weeks, Elena lived at the hospital, learning every detail of her son's care. She sat with the doctors, asked questions, studied charts, and learned how to hold her fragile baby when the nurses finally let her. Each ounce gained was a victory. Each day without complication was a miracle. But Alexander had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. "You can't live here forever," he said one morning, his tone firm but gentle. "You and your son need a home, a safe one." Elena shook her head. "I can't live in a penthouse again. I can't pretend like money fixes everything." Alexander's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "It's not about pretending, it's about protecting. Let me show you." 2 days later, Elena walked into a townhouse tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It wasn't flashy like Matthew's penthouse, but elegant, warm, filled with light. The nursery had already been prepared, painted in soft blues and creams. A rocking chair sat by the window, sunlight streaming over it. Tears filled Elena's eyes. "You did this?" Alexander nodded. "For both of you, this isn't about wealth. It's about giving you a place where no one can touch you. She pressed a hand over her mouth, overwhelmed. For the first time in months, she felt the ground beneath her feet steady. The second step was strength. Alexander arranged for a private tutor in business and finance. At first, Elena resisted. I don't need this, I just want to be a mother. But Alexander's gaze was steady. Being a mother means being prepared. Matthew used ignorance to control you. Knowledge is power, Elena, and you need it. So she studied. Late nights after her baby fell asleep, she sat at the oak desk in her townhouse, poring over textbooks, learning about investments, mergers, board structures. The language was foreign at first, but slowly it became familiar. Weeks turned into months. The quiet, broken woman who once hid in shadows began to change. Her posture straightened, her eyes sharpened. She no longer flinched when people spoke of money or power. She was learning the language of survival, no, of dominance. The third step was appearance. One afternoon, Alexander introduced her to a stylist and a tailor. Elena frowned at the array of fabrics and jewelry spread across the room. I don't need this, she protested. Alexander's voice was calm but firm. This isn't about vanity. It's about armor. When you walk into a room filled with people who want to tear you apart, you need to look untouchable. Clothes can't change who you are, but they can remind the world of your worth. Reluctantly, she agreed. The day she slipped into her first custom gown, midnight silk hugging her frame, diamond studs glinting at her ears, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The reflection wasn't the abandoned wife, it wasn't the trembling girl from the hospital. It was a woman reborn. Her hair framed her face in sleek waves, her posture radiated poise, and in her eyes burned a fire no betrayal could extinguish. For the first time, Elena whispered to her reflection, "You are enough." The fourth step was resolve. News of Alexander Grant's guardianship decision spread like wildfire. Newspapers declared it a shock. Billionaire names unexpected heir. Tabloids speculated about Elena, painting her as mysterious, intriguing. Some whispered that she had trapped him, others claimed she was lucky. Matthew and Vanessa scoffed. At first, she won't last, Matthew sneered over breakfast, tossing the newspaper aside. She's weak, she always was. This is just Alexander trying to play savior. Vanessa smirked, sipping champagne, and when she cracks under the pressure, we'll be there to laugh. But as weeks passed, their confidence faltered. Elena didn't crack. She rose. She appeared at charity luncheons with Alexander, poised and graceful, her simple elegance eclipsing Vanessa's ostentation. She spoke softly but firmly in business meetings, her questions sharp enough to make seasoned executives pause. She carried herself not as a woman desperate for approval, but as one who no longer needed it. And slowly, society began to shift. Whispers turned into admiration. Eyes that once pitied her now followed her with respect. Elena Carter, once discarded, was becoming a force. One evening, as she rocked her son to sleep, Alexander stood in the doorway watching quietly. "You've changed," he said softly. Elena looked up, smiling faintly. "No, I just remembered who I was supposed to be." He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. "And Matthew, he won't see it coming." Her smile hardened. "Good. Let him choke on his arrogance. He left me broken, Alexander. Now he'll see me whole, and stronger than he ever imagined." Her son stirred in her arms, tiny fingers curling against her skin. Elena kissed his forehead, whispering, "For you, my love. Everything I do now is for you." The woman who once wept in hospital corridors was gone. In her place stood a mother, a survivor, and soon, a warrior ready to reclaim her dignity. Her transformation was not complete, but the path was clear. And when the moment came to confront Matthew and Vanessa, Elena would not tremble. She would rise. The Blackwood Charity Gala was the crown jewel of Chicago's social calendar. It was the night when fortunes were flaunted, alliances forged, and reputations sealed in glitter and champagne. The city's elite gathered beneath chandeliers dripping with crystals, their laughter echoing off marble walls, their diamonds flashing like stars. And at the center of it all, as always, stood Matthew Carter and Vanessa Miller. Matthew wore a tailored tuxedo that shimmered under the lights, his grin wide as he greeted investors and old money heirs alike. Vanessa clung to his arm in a gown of gold sequins, her beauty weaponized for every camera in sight. They were smug, untouchable, basking in the illusion they had crafted, that they were Chicago's golden couple. What they didn't know was that the night would not belong to them. It would belong to Elena Carter. For weeks, whispers had spread through the city. Elena, the discarded wife, was back. She had been seen at Alexander Grant's side, elegant and composed, her presence sparking curiosity and speculation. But tonight, those whispers would ignite into fire. Outside the grand ballroom, a black limousine pulled to a stop. Reporters surged forward, flashes exploding. The driver opened the door, and out stepped Alexander Grant, tall and commanding in a classic black tuxedo. The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling. Then Elena appeared. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her curves, its neckline daring, its train sweeping across the carpet like a wave of power. Diamonds sparkled at her ears, and her hair cascaded in sleek waves. But it wasn't the dress or the jewels that silenced the crowd. It was her eyes. Gone was the woman who once hid in shadows. Elena's gaze was steady, unflinching, radiating a strength that no betrayal could shatter. And in her arms, swaddled in white satin, she carried her son. Gasps echoed across the entrance. Photographers snapped furiously, their shouts overlapping. "Is that her baby? Alexander, is this your heir? Elena, how does it feel to be back?" Alexander placed a protective hand on Elena's back, guiding her forward with quiet authority. His expression was calm, but his presence shouted one truth. This woman and this child were untouchable. Inside the ballroom, Matthew froze mid-laugh as the announcement rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alexander Grant and his family." The word struck him like a slap. His family? The crowd parted like the sea as Alexander and Elena entered. Heads turned, whispers erupted. Investors craned their necks, socialites clutched their pearls. Matthew's grip on his champagne flute tightened until it nearly shattered. Vanessa's smile faltered. What is she doing here?" she hissed. Elena's heels clicked against the marble as she crossed the floor. Every step was deliberate, every movement a declaration. She didn't hide, she didn't tremble, she walked straight toward Matthew. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, time stilled. Matthew saw not the fragile wife he had abandoned, not the woman who had begged for love. He saw someone unrecognizable, reborn, radiant, untouchable. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. Elena stopped just a few feet away, her son resting peacefully in her arms. She smiled, a smile sharp as glass. "Hello, Matthew." His throat constricted. "Elena, what is this?" She tilted her head slightly. This is my son. Our son, except you gave him up. And now," she glanced at Alexander, who placed a hand on the baby's head gently, "he has a father worthy of him." The crowd gasped, murmurs rippled like wildfire. She said their son. Matthew abandoned his child. Alexander Grant claimed him. Matthew's face flushed crimson. "You can't. This is absurd. He's not." Alexander's voice cut through, smooth but lethal. "He is my heir, legally, officially, and more than that, he is my son in every way that matters. The law recognizes it. The world will recognize it. The only one who doesn't is the man who walked away." The room went silent. Investors who had once flattered Matthew now exchanged uneasy glances. Socialites whispered behind jeweled hands. Vanessa's voice rose shrill with desperation. "She's lying. This is some trick to humiliate you, Matthew. Don't let them." Elena's laughter cut her off. It wasn't bitter, but clear, resonant, carrying across the room. "Humiliation? No, Vanessa. Humiliation is what you and Matthew did to me, what you thought you could bury. But the truth has a way of surfacing, louder, brighter than any of your lies." Vanessa's face drained of color. Matthew lunged forward, his voice breaking. "Elena, you don't know what you're doing. You'll regret this. But Elena didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her eyes burning into his. "No, Matthew, you'll regret this. Every toast you made with her on your arm. Every whisper you spread about me being weak. Every night you thought I was forgotten. You'll regret it all. Because while you built your empire on betrayal, I built mine on survival. And survival always wins." The crowd erupted. Some gasped, some clapped, some whispered furiously. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Matthew's carefully curated image shattered. Alexander slipped an arm around Elena's shoulders, steady and sure. Together, they turned toward the stage as the master of ceremonies stammered, trying to regain control of the evening. But it was useless. The gala was no longer Matthew's stage. It was Elena's. She stood tall, her son safe in her arms, Alexander at her side. And in that moment, she wasn't just the woman who had been humiliated, abandoned, discarded. She was the woman who returned, stronger than ever, the mother of a billionaire's heir, and the symbol of resilience that no one could ignore. And Matthew Carter, once the king of the room, now stood exposed, trembling in the ruins of his pride. The silence after Elena's words was deafening. It hung heavy in the air of the Blackwood Gala, pressing against the crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Matthew Carter stood frozen, his face pale, sweat beading at his temples. Vanessa clutched his arm, her golden gown suddenly looking garish under the unforgiving lights. Elena did not flinch. She stood at the center of the ballroom, her child resting peacefully in her arms, Alexander Grant at her side like an unshakable fortress. Cameras flashed, capturing every second. The story that Matthew and Vanessa had built, of power, success, and perfection, was crumbling before their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander's voice boomed across the room, calm yet commanding, "there are truths tonight that can no longer be hidden. The woman standing beside me is Elena Carter. She is not a discarded wife. She is not a broken mother. She is the strongest person I have met, and her son is my heir. From this day forward, the Grant legacy belongs to him." The crowd erupted. Some gasped, others clapped, some whispered furiously into their phones, already spreading the news like wildfire. Headlines would be printed before the night was over. Matthew staggered forward, his voice desperate. "You can't do this. He's my son." Elena turned slowly, her eyes piercing him. "Your son? The one you abandoned? The one you never once came to see in the hospital? The one you signed away like he was nothing?" She stepped closer, her voice strong, resonant. "No, Matthew. He stopped being your son the moment you chose your ego over his life. You are nothing to him, nothing to me." Matthew's lips quivered. For the first time in years, the man who thought himself untouchable looked small. Vanessa hissed, her mask slipping. "She's manipulating you, Alexander. Can't you see? She's just a desperate woman clinging to." Alexander's gaze cut her down instantly. "Enough. I know manipulation when I see it, Miss Miller. Elena is not desperate. She is dignified, she is resilient, and she has more honor than you and Matthew combined." Vanessa's face drained of color. Her claws, once sharp, were useless against the wall of power surrounding Elena. Investors, donors, and socialites who had once fawned over Matthew now began to drift toward Alexander and Elena, offering congratulations, admiration, respect. In that moment, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The gala was no longer Matthew's throne. It was Elena's victory march. Later that night, after the flashes dimmed and the whispers faded, Elena stood on the balcony of her townhouse, her baby asleep in the nursery. The city skyline glittered in the distance, but her eyes weren't on the lights. They were on the horizon. Alexander joined her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered her one. She shook her head with a faint smile, cradling a mug of tea instead. "You did it," he said quietly. Elena let out a soft laugh. "No. We did it. You gave me strength when I had none. You gave my son a future." Alexander's gaze lingered on her, his expression softening. "No, Elena, you found your own strength. All I did was remind you it was there." Her eyes shimmered with gratitude. For years she had been told she was less capable, less valuable, less deserving. But now she knew better. She was not less. She was more. Her baby stirred in the other room and she smiled. "I don't care about the headlines. I don't care what Matthew or Vanessa say tomorrow. All that matters is him, my son, our future." Alexander's lips curved. "And it's a future built on truth, not lies, on love, not betrayal." The next weeks proved him right. Matthew's empire collapsed. Investors withdrew, appalled by his abandonment of his family. Tabloids dragged him and Vanessa mercilessly, painting them as villains who had thrown away a child for greed. Invitations dried up, doors slammed shut. The golden couple was nothing more than fools stripped bare. Vanessa left first. "I didn't sign up for this," she snapped, packing her designer dresses. "You're finished, Matthew." And she was right. Matthew was left alone, his fortune crumbling, his pride shattered. Elena, meanwhile, rose higher. She didn't just rely on Alexander's name. She carved her own. She took the business training seriously, investing in projects close to her heart. Art schools for underprivileged children, community centers like the one she grew up in. People began to know her not as the ex-wife of Matthew Carter, but as Elena Grant, the woman who turned pain into power. At a press conference 6 months later, she stood on a stage, her son in her arms, Alexander at her side. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, But Alina's voice cut through, steady and strong. To every woman who has ever been told she is not enough, she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd, hear me, you are more than enough. To every mother abandoned, to every wife betrayed, know this. Betrayal does not define you. Survival does. Strength does. Love does. My son was born into the shadow of rejection. But he will grow up in the light of resilience, and so can you. The room erupted in applause. For once, Alina wasn't crying tears of sorrow, but of triumph. That night, when she returned home, she tucked her son into his crib and whispered, "We made it, my love. They thought we were weak, but we showed them we were stronger than they could ever imagine." Her son's tiny fingers curled around hers, his breathing soft and steady. And in that quiet room, Elena Carter knew the truth. She had been broken, humiliated, nearly destroyed. But she had risen. She had transformed her pain into power, her despair into determination. Matthew and Vanessa had lost everything. But Alina had gained something greater, a new life, a new family, and a future no one could take from her. Her story was no longer one of betrayal. It was one of survival, strength, and victory. And her final words, spoken not to the crowd but to every woman watching her journey, would echo for years. A woman is never truly defeated. Betray her, and she will rise stronger. Abandon her, and she will build an empire. Try to silence her, and her voice will shake the world. The story was over, but Elena's legacy was just beginning. So that's how our story comes to an end, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here, watching until this very moment, it means something in Elena's journey touched your heart in a way words can't fully explain. Maybe it reminded you of a wound, maybe it whispered hope into your own struggles. Elena's fall and rise teach us something timeless, that even in betrayal, even in humiliation, we are not defined by what others do to us, but by how we choose to respond. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Elena was abandoned, humiliated, broken. Yet she discovered that her pain was not her ending, but her transformation. And isn't that what life demands from all of us? To take the ashes of our suffering and turn them into the foundation of something greater? So, if you're carrying your own battles tonight, remember, you are stronger than you think. You can rise, you can rebuild, and your story is far from over. If this journey moved you, my friends, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, let's keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us all. No storm lasts forever.